Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Yevamos Daf Tzadi Tes, and we are starting at a fresh Mishnah, 3/4 of the way down on Tzadi Ches and Beis. Let us jump right in. Chamesh nashim shenis arvu vladosehen. 5 women are born, and the babies in the nursery get all mixed up. We don't know who their children are. Rashi, in the middle of the page, Dibur Maskil Masnisim shenis arvu vladosehen. Zecharim, all the boys were male. Now these children that were born, these 5 children that were mixed up, were all the second child for each of these women, and each of them already had a previous child where we knew exactly who the parents were for that child. So their first child born, we know who they are. The second child, all the kids got mixed up in the nursery. Now, the children who were unidentified, where we weren't exactly sure who their mothers were, and they married women and then they died. So all these women are now going to fall to the Vadai brothers, the firstborn brothers. So how do we navigate this situation with halachic integrity? And the Mishnah says, so the way that it works is that the 4 Vadai brothers will each do Yibum, and then one of them will actually marry one of the women, and we'll see in the Gemara how this halachically works. And then, what? It says, Arba cholzin la'achas ve'echad miyabim. Oh, sorry. So 4 will do chalitza and 1 will do yibum. And the Gemara will explain the halachic mechanics of this. Then the Gemara says after that's done, that only takes care of one of the women. Only one of the women is now married, one of the Yevamos. So the Gemara then says that there's another round that has to take place. And in fact, there will be a total of 5 rounds, so that each of the women will have this experience of hu v'shlosha. This guy who was miyabim and 3 of the others will be cholzin la'achas ve'echad miyabim, and then that too will yield a case scenario where one of the women will end up getting married. And nimtzu, after you go through this cycle 5 times, at arba chalitzos v'yibum l'kol achas ve'achas. Each woman will experience 4 chalitzos as they go through the rounds of being rejected, accepted, and then the men keep moving around in a way where every woman gets 4 chalitzos and 1 yibum. And says the Gemara as it opens 10 lines from the bottom on Tzadi Chesam and Beis, v'davka michlatz v'hadar yibume. It needs to be that the chalitzos were done first. Why? We'll see in a moment. Aval yibume bereisha lo. You cannot have yibum first because the kapaga b'yavama b'shuk, because you might be doing something halachically very, very problematic. And we have to make sure that that's not the case. So yibum, the chalitza has to come first, and then we allow for the yibum to take place. Says the Gemara, why does it have that second qualifying line of hu v'shlosha cholz and la'achas? We already gave the method of how we're going to tackle this problem. So the Gemara says, we shouldn't say that one man should be miyabim 5 women. That's not the right way to do it. But really, each person should marry one person. Why do they do that? Why can't it be that all 5 women are married? If all the chalitzas come first, it shouldn't be problematic. Says the Gemara, because Dilma Misram Yalei Diyodeh. Because remember that there's a mitzvah to do yibum. So even though it's only a 1 in 5 chance that the woman that he ends up marrying is his actual yevama, but in that 1 in 5 chance, there's a chance that he's marrying his yevama, and that's a mitzvah. That's a mitzvah in Chumash. So therefore, we want every one of the 5 brothers to get married. Let's learn a couple of iterations of this case. Miksasan achim, miksasan she'ein achim. If you have some of the men, the boys who got mixed up in the nursery, and some are not, and then they grow up, and then they get married, and then they die, and they have these women who are left as Yevamos. So then says the Gemara, ha'achen cholzen, that's the last short line on Tzadi Ches Mebeis, ha'achen cholzen, the brothers should do chalitza, v'she'ein ha'achen miyabmin. And the Gemara says this is very, very obvious. It makes sense that you would make such a distinction that the achen will be the ones to do chalitza, and the she'ein achen should be miyabmin. That makes a lot more sense because that way you prevent any cases of yevama l'shuk. Says the Gemara, Maika Amar, this case should be very obvious, and therefore Amar of Safra Hachi Kamar. Really, the pshat in this case was not as it read in its basic form, but rather as follows. Where at the first long line on Tzadi Chesam and Beis toward the bottom of the page, what does Rav Safra say the case actually was? Some of the boys were paternal brothers and some were maternal brothers. They do chalitza because we don't really have yibum by descendants of a woman. The brothers who are paternally related, miyabim, they do the yibum. What about another iteration? Miksasim kohanim and miksasim she'enim kohanim. Let's say that some of the boys were kohanim and some of them were not. So then says the Gemara, kohanim cholzin, the kohanim have to do chalitza. Have to do chalitza, and she'ein kohanim miyabim, and the non-kohens should do yibum. And the Gemara then says, "Miksasan Kohanim, Miksasan Achim Mina'im." What about a case where some were Kohanim and some were maternally brothers? In both cases, we do that because we have to make sure that a Kohen never marries a Chalutza. It's a Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza. He cannot marry that person, and therefore we restrict in this mixture of babies who got mixed up in the nursery. We restrict Kohanim from marrying any of these women because they might well be a chalutza. And that brings us to the very top of Tzadi Tesmid Aleph, where the Gemara presents some unique cases of Safek Yibum. Says the Gemara, Tzadi Tesmid Aleph, top line, top word, Tanu Rabbanan. Yesh choletz le'imo b'safek. There's a case scenario where a person would have to do Yibum to his mother in a case of Safek, and as well, and la'achosa misafek, also a case with his sister, and last but certainly not least, lebito misafek. And we're going to go through each of these cases. Each of these probably warrants a picture, but I think we'll be able to get through it. But these cases are sophisticated. It says the Gemara, lebito misafek. Okay, ketzad. What is the first case of imo misafek? Says the Gemara, here's the case, imo. So let's say you have a man, and we're talking about his mother, v'isha acheres, his mother and a random woman in town. Each of them have one child that they know exactly who it is. And then each of them get pregnant again, and they both have children that get mixed up in the nursery, and they literally, it means in hiding, but it means that we don't know who's who. Let's say the babies were born. Does it literally mean in the dark and they couldn't see? That doesn't matter. The point is that the babies were mixed up at birth, and we don't know. This comes up as big shilas with fertility treatments, huge shilas. And the poskim write that we need a shomer when we do fertility treatment. So in Eretz Yisrael, they have this organization called Machon Pua, and Machon Pua, I think you have to pay them. I don't know exactly how it works. They basically send a Machon Pua staff member, a from person, to the hospital, and they function as an aid to say that when they're back in the back room, actually taking zera and applying it and putting it into an egg, that they actually look at the label and it says, husband Jewish man X to husband's wife Jewish woman Y, and they've actually caught hundreds of errors. Hafla of a fellow, not normal. There was just a lawsuit recently where two Caucasian people gave birth through in vitro fertilization to a black baby because they made a mistake. All these big emotional and psychological, and in our case, it wouldn't be a halachic shiloh. It wouldn't be halachic shiloh because the mother would for sure be the mother. She burned the child. Even in surrogacy, we follow the status of the woman who gave birth. So these are all big shilohs. But in this case, we're talking about just a technical error. We're not talking about an in vitro issue. We're just talking about the babies got confused. Fine. Well, let's keep going in the case. Fourth line. Uba b'nashel zo v'nasa ima shel zo. So the son of one woman married the other woman. That's not a problem. That's mutter. And they married, and then umesu, and then they died. Below banim. So therefore, in a case like that, you have to do chalitza to both women, because the boys are brothers, and therefore, in one way they're brothers, and therefore, oh, it's fascinating. They do.
If the kids were mixed up, how are they allowed to marry in the first place?
What?
The kids were mixed up, right? They each gave birth to a child. We're not sure.
We're talking about the Vadai sons. The Vadai sons cross-married the mothers. That's what the Gemara said. Is that first it says V'lehen shnei zecharim, line 3. V'lehen shnei zecharim.
They already had two other kids.
No, each woman had one child that was a Vadai. That for sure that was their child.
Before.
Yeah. So let's say now they're the 10. Then their younger stuff. Yeah. Then their younger children were the
Vadais died.
The Vadais cross-married the women and then died, and then it fell b'yibum to their brothers, to their brothers. So then they had to do it was a problem, and they had to do a double.
Why do they fault Yevamos if they have children? They didn't.
Huh? They didn't have
They
children.
married. They each had a kid.
No, you're in the wrong generation now. Look at line 3. V'lahen shnei zecharim. So let's say that you have two women, Rachel and Chana. They're not related to one another. Okay.
Right.
And they each have children who are Vadai. So one of them has a Yaakov, one of them has a Chaim, and they definitely know that child. At birth, put a bracelet on the ankle, we know exactly what it is. Fine. Then 2 years later, they have another set of children, but in the nursery, that kid gets mixed up. The Vadais cross-marry the mothers, and when they die without children, the 5-year-olds, right? Let's say now they're 25, right? Now they're older.
But they're cross-marrying the mothers who had at least Suffolk children.
He did, but that man didn't have a child, and Yibum follows the father. The father of the woman married a son. She married the generation younger. She married the Vadai. I should have drawn the case now. Now I feel bad. Right.
Sorry.
One more time. Imo, let's read it again. Line 2. Ketzad. What's the case of the Imo misafek? So Imo, the Isha Acheres, we have Rachel and we have Chana, not related to one another. They're friends. Each of them have a child that they definitely know is their child. Fine. That's child number 1. And then child number 2 that each of them have is and then they had a child again. So child number 1 is a vadai. We know who they are. We know who they belong to. One belongs to Rachel, one belongs to Chana. But child number 2, Rachel and Chana delivered at the same time in the same hospital, and they mixed up the babies in the nursery. Now, Babana Shalzu, the vadai child of Rachel married Chana, and the vadai child of Chana married Rachel, and then they died. And because these men who were the vadai children didn't have children, therefore the women fell b'yibum. But we don't know whose kids the next kids are. So therefore, they had to do chalitza to both women. And therefore, Nimsa, says the Gemara on line 7, Nimsa kol echad v'echad choletz l'imo misafek. Okay, so that's case number 1. Case number 2, v'la achosa misafek. What's the case where a person would have to do chalitza to his sister misafek? It says the Gemara, Ketzad. Imo v'isha acheres, same, Rachel and Chana. She'yoldu shtei nekevos b'machba. And the children that they have are 2 girls, and the 2 girls get mixed up at birth. Uba'u achehen shalome osa ha'im. They had half brothers, v'nasu mumesu b'lobanim, and they married them, and then they died without children. Choletz l'shteim. Then there would have to be chalitza to both sisters, and nimtza choletz la'achosa misafek. And the bito misafek as well, quarter of the way down. Ketzad, what's the case of his daughter? Ishto v'isha acheres she'yoldu shtei nekevos b'machba. Same as the previous case. 2 women, Rachel and Chana, who are friends. They delivered at the same time. They both had girls, and the girls got mixed up in the nursery. Same as before, that they got married by this by Achain, Ubo Achain v'Nasum, and brothers came and married them below Banim, and then they died. Zechol, it's the Bito Misafek. Zechol, it's the Bito Misafek. So these cases are constructed to show that it is possible that because of the suffix status of the child and therefore the suffix status of the mother, one may end up doing chalitza twice, once to an immediate family member, which really sounds off color. It doesn't sound right. But the chalitza is a suffix. We're not sure because we don't know who the child is. Therefore, we don't know who the mother is. Okay, says the Gemara, 3rd of the way down. Tanya, we have a brisa. Hi, Reb Meir Omer, ish ve'isha pa'amim shamalidim chamesh umos. You can have one couple that is able to bring 5 different nations into the world. Okay, this sounds like a riddle, a Shabbos table riddle. How can you have 5 people, 5 different generations born from one couple? Ketzad Yisrael shalokach eved v'shivcha min ashuk. A yid buys an eved and a shivcha min ashuk, and v'lahen shnei banim. So the Yisrael is not the one having the children. The eved v'shivcha are having the children. So these eved v'shivcha, they have 2 children already. V'nisgayer echad mehen. So now they had 2 children when they were purchased. So the eved and shivcha are purchased, and they have 2 kids. Those 2 kids are regular gerim. They're regular goyim at the moment. V'nisgayer echad mehen, and one of them converted. Nimtza echad ger v'echad oved kochavim. Now we've got 2. We have a ger and we have oved kochavim. Next, how do we get to generation number 3? Hitbilan l'shem abdus. Then these people were turned into avadim. V'nizkiku zelazeh, and they had another child. Then harekan ger v'oved kochav v'eved. Okay, now that this couple that came into the Jewish family they came into this Yisrael's family with 2 kids, and one converted. So one's a goy, one is a ger, and now we have an eved. Good.
How do you get that?
Because he took this couple, the Yisrael who owns this couple. He made sure that their children would then be avadim. They were hitbilan l'shem avdus. The children were converted into avadim. But they had another child, and the child was converted into being an eved by purchase power. That's however they did it. Then shichreres shivcha. Then they freed the shivcha to make her into a Jew. Uba aleha eved. And then a non-Jew slept with this now Jew, the shivcha who converted. Harekan gervov kochav eved umamzer. Because we learned about this that eved abba al giores is going to be a mamzer. That's the big shiloh we were discussing as well. Let's say stam, you have a Yiddish shemedel who marries a goy. Is that child a mamzer? Now that's a real sheet in the Tanaim, which we've learned about many times throughout this Masechta. Makes it a lot more sad for the bristas that I go to where I see that. I used to just think nebach, okay, fine, like we saw the Gemara yesterday, zir masusim zir masam. We don't really care. No, the kid could be a mamzer. We don't pass it now. I'm just saying it's the real heavy shilohs. Okay, and then what was the last case? Shechrer shnehem. Then if both the eved and the shivcha are freed, which means they're halachically Jewish, and then they got married and had another child, rekan ger, we're able to figure all this out. Fine. Michael Mashman, who cares? Congratulations. So what was the mental gymnastics all about? Says the Gemara, it was only to highlight this din that Oved Kochavim ve'Eved Abal Bas Yisrael Havlad Mamzer. Wow. If you look at a Gemara like this, it actually seems like we paskin this way, but we don't. We paskin that the baby is not a mamzer. Otherwise, Klal Yisrael, in addition to the disaster that we're currently in, we'd be in a much bigger halachic disaster, because unless you then knew that that you're 100% sure that every child was born from a Jewish father and a Jewish mother, mamzerus would be rampant. I mean, it'd be everywhere. Terrible. Tanu Rabbanan, there's a brisa. This takes us almost to the next Mishnah. Yesh mocher es aviv lahagbos im ksuba. There's one who has to actually sell something of his father's in order to collect his mother's ksuba. Ketzad, what's the case? Yisrael lokach eved v'shivcha min hashuk v'lehem ben. A Jew purchases an eved and a shivcha from the marketplace, and they have a child. That child is a goy. V'shichrer es hashivcha v'nasa. Then he frees up the shivcha to become a Jew and marries her. The Omad, the Kasav, Kol Nechasav Livna, and then writes all of the Nechasim to the child. So now this child, who's not Jewish, is holding on to all the money. So the child is holding the Nechasim of the father. So through that, you're basically taking the nechasim of the father in order to pay off the mother's ksuba. Lehagbos leimo ksubasa. And my kamashman, what does this come to teach us? It teaches us really a tangential din that kula Reb Meirhi the avda metaltale. The way we view an eved as metaltalin is as loose products. Well, metaltalin the shtabde leksuba. We can use metaltalin as a shibud, as a lien for a ksuba. V'baisema kamashman avda kimikarkoitami. Or it comes to teach us that avadim are like karka, and karka as well can be purchased and sold. Must listen. This actually happened on my block. This Mishnah where you have a mother is birthing while her oldest daughter is birthing. You see these like Rabbi Resnick and his shiur is like, in a beautiful Yiddish family, you have it that the 50-year-old, 45-year-old grandmother is giving birth while her 30-year-old daughter is giving birth. Or 25-year-old daughter is giving birth. These things happen. This is a Mishnah in Mefurish Maseches Ksubas. Ha'isha shenis arva vlada bivlad kalasa. So the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law are in the same exact delivery room, and they deliver a child, and the kids get mixed up. Wow, that is not a good way to come home from the hospital. Very confusing. But what are you supposed to do? They flip a coin, and they pick a child. Okay, now what? What are the implications of that lack of knowledge of which child belongs to which? Today, we could solve this problem with DNA, figure it out. But back in the day, we could not. We would probably rely on this halachically as well, even though DNA doesn't always factor in halachic sugyas. But I think here it's just more of a gilui milsa than it is actual edus. I would presume there's such a distinction, and we would rely on that distinction. Either way, back in the day, they didn't have that. Higdilu hata'arovos, when the children who we don't know who they are, we don't know who their parents are. When they get older, v'nasu nashim umesu, they get married and they die, and it leaves those women to the remaining brothers. So it depends. If the remaining brothers are of the kala, b'nei hakala, so cholzin v'lo miyabmin, they have to do only chalitza. Why? Because there's a suffix. Shu suffix eshes achiv. We're not sure if it's eshes achiv, in which case there's a mitzvah of yibum, or suffix eshes achi aviv, or maybe it's the higher generations. It's the 50-year-old woman, and it's her family member, or it's her son, whatever it is. It's her son that's b'yibum, and we therefore don't know. That would be a suffix doraisa, so that's not allowed. And had the Yevamos been the b'nei hazakena, so then all chotzin o miyabmin, suffix eshes achiv ve'eshes ben achiv. So either there's a mitzvah of yibum of eshes achiv, or it's mutter to marry eshes ben achiv. In that case, you can marry that particular person. So that's how we would have paskin in this case of suffix, using the general rules of suffix d'oraisa l'chumra, no problem. Now, let's say that it wasn't the ta'arovos who died. It wasn't the children who we didn't know their status who died. Mesu aksherim, the brothers who, in the case number one, where the women fell to Ibum, they're the ones who died, and then now the women fell to the ta'arovos. So ta'arovos of bnei zakena, if the children who is unknown is in regards to the bnei zakena, cholzin v'lo miyabmin shu suffix eshes achiv ve'eshes achi aviv livnei hakala echad choletz ve'echad miyabmin. So again, each applying the same principles and trying to figure out and balancing out how all these halachos would work. What about kohenes shenisare vlada bevlad shivchasa? Let's say that there's a kohenes, she gives birth at the same time as her shivcha, and the children get mixed up. That's a These are all very big problems, but that's all one of the very big problems. They're allowed to eat truma once a kohen, but we still allow the vlad of the shivcha because we don't know who it is. It could be either one. We allow them to eat truma, and v'cholkin chelek echad begoren, they get one portion at the goren. We'll be discussing this more at length. Top of Tzadi Testament base. Ve'enan mitam on the mason. They're not allowed to go be tamei mace for a loved one. Ve'enan nosin nashim ben ksheros ben psulas. They cannot marry women whether or not they're kosher or pasul. Higdilu ata arovos. And when these children get older, again, it's a suffik kohen, suffik shivcha, suffik child of a shivcha. V'shichur zeh, and then they did shichur to free them up. So then nosim nashim ru'us lekahuna ve'enan mitam on the mason. Then they could marry a woman that in theory a kohen could marry. They're allowed to at least get married. Ve'enan mitam on the mason, but they're still not allowed to become tamei mace. But if in fact they do become tamei mace for one of their immediate family members, einan sofkin harbaim, they don't get malchus. As well, when this shichur happened with these two people, and therefore we know at least for sure that this child is not an eved, so then another din applies. They should not eat truma lechatchila, but if they do, they don't have to pay the typical consequence of karen v'chomesh, the principal plus 20%, it's really 25%. Because we don't know if they're kohanim. They might be a kohen, in which case they don't need to pay that because you're going to allow to teach them. What about?
Are they kohanim or are they?
Suffix, we don't know. No, that's the same. It's the same suffix. I presume it's the same. I guess so. Why not? I mean, if it's benach or ben, but once it's a woman if it's a girl who's born and she marries another man, then that other man will be the kovea for the next generation. So let's say you have Ben, and then finally a bas, and that girl marries a kohen, then the next kid's a kohen for sure. So you have to break the cycle with a girl, but what can you do?
But otherwise, you could have 10 generations where they don't know what they are.
Correct, and they can marry as long as we remove them from shivcha status and evet status by being mishacher of them, but they can never be treated like a full kohen. They're always going to be. It's only a din. It's only applicable as it relates to halachos of kahuna. They can still marry. They just can't marry kohen, which is fine. They don't take portions at the granary, which we'll discuss. And if in fact they have truma and they sell it, they can keep the money. Rashi is going to help us out here. Rashi just to our left. They're not allowed to take the extras from the kachim like the skins. What Rashi there says lahakri. We don't allow them to be makruv kachim. The Mishnah continues 8 lines down. We don't take things out of their property if they already had them. And when it comes to regular shchitu, normally people would give over these body parts to kohana by regular shchita, not shaykh, because this person might be a kohen to start with. If they had an animal that's a bechor, so then we don't do anything with it. We don't give it to a kohen because he might be a kohen. We just take that animal and we don't use it because there are limitations on a bechor, and it has to sit there until it has to graze until it becomes tummy. The nosnin allowed this person we treat, to Texas question, with chumrei kohanim, the chumrei Yisraelim. We have chumras on them. We have to make sure that they don't violate any halachos. Not a fun existence. There really are some complications there. The Gemara says, Mesu ksherim, quoting a line from our Mishnah, you called him a kasher. Doesn't that imply elahanach mishum de'iaruv luhu habalu psulin? You're using the word kosher. Doesn't that imply that the children whom we don't know who they belong to are psulim? It's a bit of a strong term. A Chris Shavcha is a pasul. We have people who are psulim, but is this person a pasul? It's a suffix. It's not a psul. So says the Gemara, you're right. Amar papa ema umesu vadayin. It's the people who are the vadai children. So it doesn't mean to imply that they're psulim because they're actually not psulim. What did it mean when it said the vnei hakala echad choletz? What was that case? Dafka michlatz v'hadar yibume aval yibume b'reish lo dekapaga b'yavama b'shuk. We needed the chalitza in regards to the case of the mother and daughter who were birthing together. In that case of chalitza, we needed the chalitza to be first because otherwise a person might have married someone who they should not have married. What about the case of Kohenes Shenis Arev, the second half of our Mishnah on the top of Tzadi Testament base? So there we said Chelek Echad Pshita. We said that they get one portion from the granary. Of course, they get one portion of Truma. Why would they get more than one portion? We might have thought that if there is a Kohen and an Eved that they have to join together at the Goren, that's not correct. And Tnan, this follows the Mishnah. The only time an Eved will ever get any portions is if he's with his master, but he doesn't get his own portion. We don't give out a portion of the grains for truma to an evet, only to his master. Rabbi Yossi argues Omer Yochol sheyomar im kohen ani tnuli b'shvil atzmi v'im evet ani He could have argued, and Rabbi Yossi is more lenient that he says that the Eved is allowed to collect on behalf of the Kohen. When it comes to the place in which Rabbi Yehuda lived, this is a fascinating halachic, I guess, historical / halachic reality. If there was a person who got truma from the Goren, that was a sign that they were Kohanim Miyuchasim. That means that before they handed out the truma to those people, somebody did the checking and the verifying and whatever it took in order to assume that they're halachically Jewish. So this is the line. But they did not rely on getting truma to be a source for yichus. I just asked this shaila to Rabbi Reese this week about Kohanim Miyuchasim. There's a family that needed a pidyon haben. And normally I use my brother-in-law, Yosef Schwartz. He's in Eretz Yisrael. His family goes way back. So I asked him, I said, is it better to do the pidyon haben late, but with a kohen miyuchas, or to do the pidyon haben on time with a kohen she'eino miyuchas? It's just, he's like, don't worry about it. He like dropped 5 names in the community of people who were miyuchas. So he didn't answer my question. I'm curious what the answer is. I don't know. I think kohanim miyuchas, but to din d'oraisa, I would imagine we should. Got to be some degree. What?
I'm not following.
A Kohen Miyuchas is a Kohen whose lineage goes back to Aaron HaKohen. So there are certain families over the course of history that we know from Jewish literature that were already tried in true Kohanim. And if you can connect back to that particular chain, then you're considered a Kohen Miyuchas. But it's hard to do because it means that your family was basically from the whole time, basically, which is rare, unfortunately. Tanya, the Brisa writes, Amar Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok, miyomai lo he'adati ela edus echad ve'edu eved lekehuna alpi. Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok says, I almost never gave edus. I did one time, and they turned an eved into a Kohen. Says the Gemara, that doesn't make any sense. How did you do that? You think they actually made him into a Kohen? Like the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair, he wouldn't eat grains that were not supposed to be eaten. All the more so it should be the case if we don't allow mistakes like this to come off the hands of people as great as Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok. You're not allowed to take an eved and make him into a Kohen. Says the Gemara, no, that's not what I meant. Chaza, we saw that an eved had received truma be'asrei de Rabbi Yossi in a place where we don't require the person who collects the food to be a Kohen Miyuchas. So he made a mistake. And ve'azal ve'asid be'asrei de Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that it's a Kohen Miyuchas. Oh, because Rabbi Yehuda says if someone's getting grain, so it must be that they're Kohanim Miyuchasim. But what Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok didn't realize is that when he saw this Eved getting the truma at the granary, it was in a place where it was the Shita of Rabbi Yossi, where we do give it to people who are not Kohanim Miyuchasim. So therefore it wasn't a raya, but it was a nice try. So that means that the one time he did give edus, it didn't matter. Tana Rabbanan, Asara ein cholchen lam truma b'veis hagranos. There are 10 people that we don't give truma to on the threshing floor. Ve'eluhein, here are the 10. Cher shota b'katan, a deaf mute, someone who has limited mental faculties, and a child. Tumtum vandrogonous, a tumtum, of course, we discussed extensively. Someone whose genitalia are covered. Vandrogonous, someone who presents with 2 genitalia, to a male and female genitalia. Ve'eved, a slave, a isha, and a woman. Ve'arel, an uncircumcised person. Ve'atame, a person who's tameh. Ve'nose isha, and ve'nose isha she'eino hoganes, and a person who marries someone they shouldn't, like an almana to a kohen gadol. The kulan meshagrin hem lebatein. All these people who are not allowed to collect on the threshing floor, they are allowed to get the food sent to their house. Chutz mitame, except for a person who's tameh. V'nosi isha she'eino hoganes, and this kohen who marries the wrong type of woman. Now, let's analyze these 10. We're going to stop about 12 lines down on Kuf Amud Aleph. Bishlama cheresh shote v'katan la b'nei de'enin. We understand why these 3 don't get, because they're the archetype in Shas for those who don't have das. Tumtum vandrogonous, when it comes to someone who has the presentation of no genitalia, or both male and female genitalia. Vandrogonous nami, they as well should not receive anything, because beria bifnei atzmonin, they are their own entity. Rashi is asking, we always want to figure out what's bothering Rashi. I think we know very quickly here. Rashi says, "V'havya zilusa de kache." Who cares if they're beri bifnei atzma? If men can have truma and women can have truma, why can't the beri bifnei atzma truma? They're one or the other. Says the Gemara, they're neither, and it's a zilusa, it's a zilzul to kache. Eved nami, top line of Kuf Amud Aleph. Baruch Hashem, we're into the 100s, which means we have 22 blot left until the exciting siyum on Maseches Yevamos. Eved nami dilma asile asuke mitruma liyuchsin. Eved nami, the reason why he doesn't get is because Dilma asila asuke michuma lichs, and he might give to his children, which he should not do. Oral v'tami mishum demi. Say they have a certain element of them that's repulsive. The orel because he's uncircumcised, and the tame because he has tuma. No seisha sheno genas lo mishum knasa, and a person who married the wrong person, they get a slap on the wrist in addition to the yisurim that they violated. They also can't get truma because they married someone that they shouldn't. Ella, here's the question: Isha my time alone. Why doesn't a woman have access on the threshing floor to? That doesn't make sense. Why she's allowed to eat? What's the problem? Says the Gemara, it's only because of a side issue, but it's a machlokas which side issue there is. Pligi bar Rav Papa Rav Huna Bereda Rav Yoshua. Chadar mishum grusha. One of the concerns as to why a woman cannot collect food on the threshing floor for her truma is because we're afraid that she's a Bas Yisrael and she might get divorced. And because the people who are giving out the truma saw her last month before she was divorced and they gave her, they'll say she's still before she got divorced. Great. Well, we don't know that she got divorced, so therefore we're going to give it to her, and it'll be an error, and that's a big problem. The second concern is because the threshing floor wasn't always near the city, and it might be an isser of yichud. My beinayu. What's the difference between these two shitas? Yikebeinayu beidare de mikrav lamata. If you have a threshing floor that's close to the city, then everyone will know she got divorced. People talk about divorces. People know the word travels, and that would be a case where maybe they know that she got divorced, but but there's an isser yichud because nobody's around. Inami de merchak. It is a very far distance, and no one knows they're divorced. But and there isn't going to be a problem of yichud. So we had said that even though these people can't go to the threshing floor, but food can be sent to them with the exception of a person who's tamei and someone who marries the wrong person. Aval, says the Gemara, Orel Meshagrin Anle. My time, why would we say that an Orel does get sent to his house? He should go get a bris. Why? Go solve the problem. This is solvable. Go get it done. My time, the reason why we still send to an Orel is Mishum de Onis. What type of Onis is there by bris milah? So Rashi paints the unfortunate case scenario. Where is this Rashi? I read it. Rashi says, no, I can't find it, but it says that it's because his brothers died.
No, 326, the fourth narrow one.
Fourth narrow. Oh, thank you. Oh, we didn't even read the reason yet. Sorry, that's why I can't find it. My time, mishum da anis, because he's anis. Says the Gemara, tmei nefesh ha-anis, the tamei nami. A person who's tamei also is anis. Says the Gemara, hi, the person by bris milah is nafish onse. He has a greater ones, a more powerful ones, and therefore, thank you, David. Rashi says, fourth line of the wide lines, shemei soechav. We know that the halacha is that if there's a chazaka that a woman bears children and those children die by when they get a bris, then the next child, the subsequent child, is not required to have bris milah. So this person's an RL, but his ones is way out of his control. Mashein kain v'hai lo nafish onse. When a person becomes tamei, he really could have tried a little bit harder. You got to try to be a little bit more careful. The RL has zero control. We'll stop right here at Tanu Rabbanon. I'm going to be out of town tomorrow, and I'll be posting and recording. There will be no shiur in person tomorrow night or on Zoom, but I'll post before shiur starts. I plan to post 2, 3, 4 o'clock, something like that. Wishing you all a beautiful night.